Welcome to the Fearless Health Podcast with host Dr. Anne-Marie Barter.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Mike. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, and it's like reliving the Sugar Summit days, except now I get to ask the question, which is going to be really, really fun. So
That's great.
We have definitely the interest in addiction and sugar in common. So I'm curious how you got into this line of work and helping people with their addictions.
Yeah, I have a podcast version. It usually brings up more questions than it answers, but the short version is I was a regular kid with a mother that was a sugar junkie and probably a father who was, well, not probably, was an alcoholic. And so I grew up loving sugar of every kind. I mean, just everything. There's a great video on YouTube. I don't know if you and I talked about it, but Eric Clapton sitting in the $7 million Antigua treatment center with Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes. And Ed says, "So Eric, this addiction stuff, it all started with heroin, right?" And he goes, "No, Ed, it started with sugar." He said, "When I was 5 years old, I was eating bread and butter and sugar sandwiches to change my state, anything that would change my state. And we used to eat bread and butter and sugar sandwiches and cinnamon toast with sugar on it and, Kool-Aid with 3 times the recipe. And if we didn't have a half inch of sugar when we got done eating our cereal in the morning, we had unfettered access to the sugar bowl. It still blows my mind. I got that sugar bowl from the estate. We didn't put enough sugar in that cereal. So fast forward, I loved everything. Every kind of candy you can think of. My reward for being the pack mule going to the grocery store was always a candy of some kind. So I'd go. Allowance, what do you spend $1 or $2 on back in the day? You spend it on candy. So I loved it all. And then I ran into alcohol, drugs and alcohol, 13, 14 years old. And we can talk about that if you want, but that party lasted until I was 28. And I got sober, and like a lot of my fellows and a lot of the treatment centers and a lot of even the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, people literally substitute sugar for their drug and alcohol issues, right? They go right back to it. Talk about the freshman 15, how it's like the freshman 50. People gain pounds like really fast in recovery, first year of recovery, right? And, it looks like they look a little healthier, but then it kind of goes past that, and then they have, they develop the diabetes and whatever. So I went on to have a regular life. I did raise a couple of sugar-free kids. Somehow I talked my wife at the time into having 2 children. They were twins, actually. Then she was sugar-free while she was pregnant. So in the womb till they were 6 years old. And that was really a hell of an experiment and just an amazing eye-opening experience. And for the rest of their childhood, we never had it in the house, but they did have it at outside birthday parties. But I went on to have a regular life, business career, and, did a lot of stuff online and whatever. And about 10 years ago, I picked up the domain sugaraddiction.com because I figured out, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And I've always enjoyed helping people with recovery stuff, whether it's drugs and alcohol or whatever. But the sugar thing was starting to get to me because of the obesity crisis and overweight kids. It just hurts my heart to watch the overweight kids because, look, they aren't buying their food before they're 10, or whatever. Their parents are giving them this stuff. And doing the summits where you and I met, running into Dr. Lustig and all these other people who have been studying this stuff for years, it's always been a fascination of mine, right? And so I literally was giving out the best information I could find at the time for 6 or 7 years, but didn't really have any success until I started to form communities and groups and coaching stuff where people got one-on-one and or group support, because it takes group support, because folks are like, it's so, look, you can give a baby this stuff, like a 1-year-old with no legal, moral, or ethical worries. It's okay, and the society, at least the people that I work with now, there's a lot of pain out there, people that are going blind, getting diabetes diagnosis, 200 and 300 pounds overweight, and they still cannot quit sugar. It's a true addiction. And I just, that's how I got here. That's the short version. And probably, like I said, it brings up more questions than it answers.
Oh, I've got some questions. I think it's really amazing that your wife at the time during pregnancy did not do any sugar. I mean, you and I both know that that gets passed through the genes, and that makes your kid much more likely to be addicted to sugar, and
I believe it.
we've seen that in the studies. So that's pretty forward thinking. Why did you decide to do that at the time? Because I think that was probably preceding the research that was out there on that.
Right. And what happened is I picked up a book called Sugar Blues. Not that it was accidental, because I was pretty health conscious, and it was popular at the time. It was in the 70s and redone in the 80s. And it was written by a guy who was at a party one time, and a woman's voice from behind said, he's putting 2 lumps of sugar in his coffee. And the woman's voice says, I wouldn't have that in my house, let alone my body, right? And it was Gloria Swanson, the famous movie star, right? And so he went on to marry Gloria Swanson, wrote this book. He was an author before that, and they promoted it all over. And it was pretty popular back in the early 80s, and so I picked that book up, and I just was fascinated. I love the story of the English empire being grown on the backs of slavery. And they take empty ships from England, go to Africa, pick up slaves, go to the Caribbean and South America, and pick up rum and molasses and sugar and tea and coffee, and then bring it back to Europe. And they grew literally, El Chapo has nothing on this empire. They just grew all over the world on the backs of slavery and sugar mostly. And so that fascinated me, and it still fascinates me. I call myself, like, if I were to be, get an MD or a PhD or something, it'd be in evolutionary biology or evolutionary anthropology, to figure out how do we get in this mess, It just interests me, and it interested me. So then I kind of tried to quit, and it was not as easy as it sounded, so I finally did quit, and took a couple of years, but I didn't have anybody really to talk to about it. So I just kept trying and made it. So that's that's the part of the story I left out.
Because you've been sugar-free and not doing any processed sugar for how many years?
Yeah, sugar, flour, and caffeine-free for 30 years. Yeah. And honestly, it's weird, because I can tell you the date that I got sober, but I could not tell you the date of any of those other 3, because it was just a blur a little bit, because it was up and down and backwards and forwards and starts and stops.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of willpower, honestly, to get off of all of those things. So you said something really interesting on the Sugar Summit that I want to go back to. You said that the folks that you help with addictions, primarily drug addictions, say that the hardest drug for them to get off of is sugar.
Yeah, what happened was weird. My parents are still alive, and I don't know. I grew up in the anonymous programs, and I didn't tell anybody, really. I mean, no one bothered me. You'd be surprised. No one worries about what you're drinking or doing drugs, but if you don't use it. So I never said anything, and I wasn't public online or anywhere about my substance use disorder or my recovery. So when they passed, I said, screw it, man. First of all, the recovery advocacy movement needs stories of people who have long-term recovery so that they can get help in drugs and alcohol, right? So that argument and that advocacy movement made sense to me, still makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm a big part of it. I'm a big participant in that. But when I did that, I literally got this flood of people who had been sober 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I got a coach sober 20 years who could not put down the sugar. Even though they've been to some recovery meetings for food and sugar, they still couldn't do it. And they didn't seem to make the connection with the addiction. Now, here's folks with an addiction background, and to a man, to a woman, everyone that I've ever talked to who's a recovering alcoholic or drug addict said that the hardest thing they ever put down was the sugar. To a man, every single woman, every single man said the same thing. And I believe it has to do with the social pressure, the social acceptability of the sugar in society. Like I said, there's no moral, legal, ethical, or worries about giving this product to a baby, to a 1-year-old. So people just haven't. Dr. Lustig says that, we're 8 years into a 30-year tectonic shift. It's going to take time. The science is now here, but just the public's not aware yet.
And it's such a it's such an addictive drug, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, if it's not sugar, you see people substitute with alcohol, or if you don't have alcohol, you see people substitute with sugar. So,
Hmm.
what are we seeing? It's been interesting, here in Colorado, when the pandemic hit or whatnot, and they were closing down pot shops and liquor stores. There was
Hmm.
actually, they were only able to shut both of those places down for couple
5 minutes.
hours before I think that they got so many calls, and I think that the state government was concerned that there was going to be a riot.
Hmm.
So those businesses, and I think that that's created a lot of tension, were considered essential during this time,
Right.
which to me speaks to the level of addiction. I mean, I
Hmm.
would be that's crazy to me, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the
sure.
line was around the block to look at,
Hmm.
for these people to get their alcohol and their drugs. Like, what's your comment on that?
Well, I mean, the beverage associations and the convenience store associations and the grocery associations say that from one year to the next, like from last April, March, April kind of thing, or February, March, April, sales went up in some cases 100%, like literally doubled for people that were locked down. So it's not a Colorado thing either. It's everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like, some 40, 50, 60% wine, 50, 80% liquor's down in general, but beer and wine and the seltzer stuff's up and 100%, so, and again, the states with marijuana, like you said, are the same thing. So, I think people's anxiety, their financial anxiety are ramped up and their addictions ramped up. I've been following, because I'm a big fan of the movement of recovery stuff online, both drugs and alcohol and the sugar stuff. But so I follow a lot of the press about it, got some alerts and stuff to try and follow it. And, the telemedicine about recovery, but more importantly, with the lack of recovery meetings, because you can't go to in-person recovery meetings,
Mm-hmm.
people are relapsing left and right. And it's a problem for people in early recovery. It's a big problem. And so, yeah, you're 100% right. When anxiety's higher, people, and this is what the bulk of the main message of my work is it's a common construct in alcohol and drug recovery that if you're 14 or 15 years old, when you quit using alcohol and drugs, that's when you stop growing emotionally. You stopped handling your whatever, your angst, your worry, your fear with drugs and alcohol. And now you have to relearn that. And you have to have other systems, emotional management systems, to learn it. And the thing people don't get is that the sugar's the same way. We grew up as a baby. You and I talked about the most fascinating stuff in the world, the neural pathways that are grooved by this drug that says worry, sugar. Even your mother would give it to you. It's like she doesn't have time. She'd give you a cookie, point you towards the TV, instead of giving you a hug and say, "What's wrong, dear?" They used it. And so then we patterned that and we used sugar. And like I said earlier, I mean, many, many people, when they do quit drugs and alcohol, substitute the sugar. They go back to the sugar because that is, and remains the original gateway drug, the original drug of abuse, the original drug of emotional management. And it's ubiquitous. So people don't think about it. It's like, they don't think like, oh, I'm upset, I have to have this. They just go do it. They get a quote unquote craving, right? What is a craving but a need for a dopamine squirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Doesn't it make you deeply sad? I mean, it makes me deeply sad when I hear you, talk about the emotions to it, because, I'm so busy yammering on about dopamine that I'm never really thinking about how these people are craving alcohol or sugar when they really needed a hug or when they really needed to be
Right.
listened to. That's really honestly tragic.
That is, again, the core of the message, both the socialization, which we talked about, is because it's so ubiquitous, but more importantly, when in my work and most drug and alcohol counseling kind of work, when someone actually realizes that this is what they are doing, that they have cleaved apart the social acceptance of this substance with the management of their emotions, then they get well. And it's not until when they keep trying to like think of what food do I eat, what exercise do I do, all this kind of other stuff that's peripheral, they don't, it's a waste of time, because and you cannot take people from SAD, the standard American diet, into this thought process. It has to be a gentle movement, right? You have to move them across time, and you have to let them, like we were talking about, they have to see the stories of other people who have gone through the same similar backgrounds and have gone through these same processes. One of the things that's amazing is that if you talk to someone who's been through a true processed food addiction recovery, someone who's been a couple 100 pounds overweight, or was always, overweight as a child, but then decided that they accept the idea that 100% abstinence from sugar and flour, it will save their life mentally and physically, and then they fall to a right-sized body, those folks will tell you, especially folks that have been through the drug and alcohol thing, but even folks that have not, their recovery is the same. It's not like they have to relearn eating. They don't have to relearn anything but how to handle and deal with those emotions that come up during that time period, which is usually the first couple of years,
Mm-hmm. And how much, my first question is, I hear all these folks say that, well, I had ice cream. It was a happy time for me and my family. I remember there's a positive association with ice cream and their mother, and they've lost their mother now. And so they go and have ice cream. What's your comment on that it was more of a positive association versus a negative event?
Yeah, no, I get it. But when was the last time you saw a movie where a woman got dumped and didn't have an ice cream party? You know what I mean? It's like a complete social norm accepted. My mother believed sugar was love. My mother's mother, my grandmother, died when she was 8 years old, right? And they made an arrangement. My grandfather moved in with his aunt, or with his sister, my great aunt, my mother's aunt. And across the street, their relatives owned a general store. And they made an arrangement. Here she is, an 8-year-old child, just lost her mother. That anytime she walked into that store, she could have any candy she wanted. No cost, put it on my tab. It's a beautiful gesture, right? But it taught her that, being kind to her meant sugar, love. And for us, it was the same thing. That's why we had unfettered access to the sugar bowl, because she just didn't put those things together. And no one does, really. And so, it's an enculturation. It's not, the substance has nothing to do with the love, right? It's like people try and say, bring back Christmas the way it was supposed to be. It doesn't have anything to do with the gifts. It's, getting together in love. And if that's the case, that's the case with, familial love or any kind of love, it doesn't have a damn thing to do with the substance you're ingesting. It does accentuate it, sure. Meaning, like when you get a dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all these great blasts from the use of excessive amounts of these products, then the event is more memorable. You feel it at a higher level. There's more good feelings around it. And these are evolutionary feelings 1 million or 2 years in the making that are now being manipulated by a substance that people have enculturated to believe they belong. And I understand why, I understand how it happened. I love the history. It's one of my, if not my favorite subject, how we got into this mess. Now we have to realize that the science says, like drinking and driving, like smoking, like the science says that possibly this evolution into our current societal norm may be detrimental to our health, right? Or your health, right? So that's kind of the short version of, sugar is love kind of thing. It's true. Yeah. I mean, I can't dispute that it is used as that.
Do you believe that the further the addiction into drugs, into alcohol, Do you believe that that's associated with a childhood trauma? Is it that simple? Is it simplified into that?
I'm a huge fan of ACEs, and I believe that trauma or disconnection is at the root of most addictions. But here's the thing, and this is an important note that I've just really recently brought into my courses and talking to people and writings, is that it doesn't freaking matter. I mean, yes, if you had sexual abuse or any kind of trauma, it doesn't matter. Like physical abuse doesn't matter. What matters is you can't sit there with a beer and a joint or a cupcake and expect to solve those issues without abstinence, without the actual emotions flowing through your body. Believe me, they will present themselves in the first year or two. What's important is that you've got to get abstinent from whichever substance you're trying to self-medicate with, and be with a crowd of people that's going to say, you're not crazy. It sounds like you're losing your mind. It feels like you're losing your mind, but half of it's, 60, 80% of it's physical, and that will pass. And then after that, when the emotions, both the daily stressors and the reoccurrence or the remembering of the trauma-based stuff starts to resurface, then you're in a place where you're 60, 90 days, 6 months clean, and have a support team around you that can say, okay, let's deal with it now, right? And then the other parts of your life start to clean up. But the problem that's missing out there is the marijuana now and the sugar for sure is not included in the quote unquote hard drugs, because this construct is very well known in decades of substance use disorder recovery. It's just not well known in this world. And it sounds far-fetched. It sounds like it's a stretch, right? But it's not a stretch to people who have, as I mentioned, lost 200 pounds and gone through this recovery. They went through this is not a politically correct word anymore, but the crazies trying to get to the other side because they had this flood of emotions when they got abstinent. Because now they don't have the substance to manipulate. They got to go for a walk. They got to call somebody. They got to get a hug, like you said. They got to do something different to manage these everyday stressors and the possibility of old trauma resurfacing.
Mm-hmm. And when you're dealing with old trauma and helping these folks through, do you believe that there's an effective method at doing that? Because there's a lot of different ways to deal with trauma. Is it just understanding that you have had this trauma? Is it something like EMDR to deal with brain spotting? What's your take to work through some of the levels of trauma, especially when it comes to addiction?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I want to preface it with, because I'm starting to get to the point where, these talks are getting out there and I'm getting blowback. I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I am not schooled or trained in this, but I am, a certified peer recovery coach. And I'm a huge fan of the peer-to-peer model, right? Where the person that can help you, the persons that can help you, are the persons that have gone through this before, right? They've walked this path before. It's almost impossible not to find someone in, depending on what tribe you join, what peer recovery group you join, that hasn't experienced exactly this, exactly what you're going through. And there's, some different kind of sayings that there's in alcohol recovery, there's something called terminal uniqueness. Terminal uniqueness means that you get dead thinking that you're this much different than other people, right? Because there's somebody in recovery has your same story, who's been through your same trauma, who's been through probably a lot worse, who's been through all of this stuff before, and they can help you, and they will help you. It's so funny that people in recovery, generally, 95% of them, get a huge jolt because it helps them to help another person struggling, And that's why I'm a big fan, both in the recovery advocacy movement and in our kind of new sugar recovery advocacy movement, to get these stories out there, get the stories of, I don't, yeah, I do a summit with all the big Harvard guys and Cornell guys, but what's more important is that the stories of average folks who've been through this get out there. And it's the peer recovery stuff I believe in mostly. Yes, I'm sure there's techniques, and I'm sure one-on-one therapy helps, but I'm a fan of peer recovery.
Mm-hmm. Just somebody that has been a mile in the same shoes.
Right.
I think that can go a long way for huge support.
Yeah.
I think the problem that I see in practice is that, someone will come in and see me and I'm like, here's what you need to do. Here are the steps, and boom, 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 boom. And then they're gone and I don't see them again for maybe a month or whatever it is. And in that time frame, they're left to their own devices without, and that motivation is there initially and then it wanes. And, and they don't have that motivation long term. And then you go back to your old habits, or you go back to your old soothing ways, or whatever that is in the interim, or, oh, this cookie doesn't matter, or this diet, So what I have found is something that's interesting in practice, I'm curious if you've seen the same thing, is that the people that do best are living for something bigger than themselves, meaning that their goal is bigger than, so if someone says, I really want to consult with you, I want to lose weight. Losing weight isn't a motivating factor, or looking great in a swimsuit isn't really enough of a motivating factor when your boyfriend dumps you and you're sobbing at, midnight, whatever it is, and that, hostess, whatever cake is there.
Sure.
Right. So, but,
Sure.
but somebody that they feel like they're losing feeling in their feet, and, they have some sort of neuropathy and they can't walk across to see their child graduate, is a much bigger goal than themselves. Right.
Yeah.
And so I actually see those people that have these big goals do so much better when it
100%.
comes to like breaking addictions on their own, believe it or not. And I'm just curious if you've seen the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we call it I didn't invent it, but it's called your why, your big why. Why are you doing this? And if I don't get that out of them, then we don't have the same success rate, because
Right.
if they can't see it. And one of the things I found, some people are visual, and I wonder, I've often wondered why visualization courses exist, right? Because from as small as I can remember, I was visualizing the future. Right.
Yeah.
And I can't never remember a time in my life where I wasn't thinking about, and it could have been the chaotic home, the alcoholic home that I grew up in. I don't know. But I was always thinking about what's the next place I can be that's a little better than this, and what's the goal? Athletics, I did it in athletics and it worked. You see a gymnast sitting at the Olympics and he's going like this. And he's like literally visualizing the whole routine, like sitting there that he's about to get up and do. And it works. It's a very effective tool. But a lot of people don't have that, never developed that, don't even know it exists kind of thing. And if they can't see that bigger life, as you said, if the life you're going to is not bigger than the life you're leaving, you're going to have limited success for sure. That's an absolute tenet, pillar of what we do, and I think recovery in general.
Yeah. So I am curious about, a topic I don't know a lot about is marijuana. I don't know a ton about marijuana.
Okay.
Much more studied on sugar and alcohol. So
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to hear what the marijuana lobby has done here, for example, where they are saying that it's not a gateway drug, it's completely safe, there's no issues about it. But anybody that I talk to that is in any sort of the addiction realm has said, no, marijuana is actually definitely very addictive. They have a very strong lobby to keep some of these facts at bay, that it is a very addictive substance. What have you seen with marijuana specifically in addiction?
Yeah, well, let me tell you my story. It's relative in a lot of ways. So in 1983, I walked into my first meeting of a recovery group, and cocaine had got to me, and I literally was on my knees. So I quit cocaine literally that day. But it took me another 3 months to quit marijuana, because at the end of the day, I had quit drinking like a couple of years before that, but I was still doing drugs. And so it took me another 3 months till February 15th of 84 to go. And yes, it involved a woman, because I was pining on Valentine's Day. But it was like on the 15th of February, I quit marijuana for the last time. And when I quit, for the first month, when I would go to the gym, and lift weights. And while I was lifting weights, I would literally get this gigantic throbbing brain headache on only one side of my brain. Now, why, I don't know. And I would literally be high again, because THC stores in fat, right? And when you're a cocaine addict for, 4 or 5 months, that stuff will kill you quick. You're pretty skinny and you don't got a lot of other fat, right? And so the fat in my brain was literally holding the THC, okay? And I would do the exercise, and I would be stoned out of my gourd for a couple of hours like I smoked a joint, right? Because the THC was still coming out. This lasted for 30 full days, like the 4 or 5 or 6 times I went to lift weights during that 30-day period, I was high every time, and I had the headache thing every time. That was mind-blowing to me, and very, very, awareness building for me, right? And I just literally, I don't know how this happened, but I just read a thing about marijuana, that the THC content of my marijuana back then was 2 to 4%. Today it's 27 to 35%. I couldn't even imagine what would happen to me if I smoked a joint today, right? I'd be like, forget about it. So I really believe that the THC is stored in the fat molecules, and that that you're not getting high. It's kind of like the sugar and any drug, really, but you're not really getting high because you always have a level of THC in your body. You're just you're getting back to normal, right? And marijuana is very different. There's a great book out there, and you may want to get this woman on your podcast called, now I can't remember it. Anyway, I'll send it to you, but she talks about her drug of choice, where she thinks that marijuana was her drug of choice as well, and she'd done them all, cocaine, everything. And she's a neuroscientist now. It's a great book, great on audio. Anyway, I'll think of it. But she says that cannabinoids have receptors all over your body. It's not a circumstance where there's, it's hitting the dopamine like alcohol, marijuana, alcohol and cocaine and heroin and stuff, where it's hitting the brain reward system. It's hitting all over your body, the cannabinoid receptors, I think she calls them, or whatever. And so it's a different high. But the more important part, I think, is that the stuff is stored in the fat. It's stored in your fat and takes its half-life is a long time to get out. So, and one of the things and this is great for this discussion, because I cannot believe that this went away. I don't know where it went, and let's have you and me bring it back, because amotivational syndrome is real. Okay. People that are pot smokers I had it. People have amotivational syndrome, and everybody giggles about it. Like, okay, you're a stoner and you can't get up off the couch. Right. Well, sugar addiction is creates amotivational syndrome as well. You cannot, because instead of doing an emotional management technique that requires effort, like a walk or, getting a massage, something that requires effort, you can substitute dopamine juice squirts, hits, by just ingesting, so you don't have to get up off the couch, right? And so then the vicious cycle begins, right? And so this amotivational syndrome in marijuana, I wish someone would bring it back and start talking about it more.
Yeah, some of the studies, I haven't looked in a while, but some of the studies are hard to find. What I noticed when I would see people that smoked a lot of pot is they would be in debilitating pain. It's like they had no association to their pain levels. And then when I would go to, because I'm a chiropractor by trade, when I would go to adjust them, it was like there was no end play to the joint. It just kept on going through. like they had created ligament laxity. It was very, very strange. And I've only seen that in that particular case. So it's very interesting when I see that when somebody is a habitual, especially smoker. Not so much, I don't see it so much with the edible piece, but I see it when they're a habitual smoker, which is quite interesting. So it's got to be from some of the toxic byproducts of the smoke creating more inflammation.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably trapped in the joints like you're describing,
Yeah. So
I think a lot is trapped in the joints. Definitely caffeine, uric acid, a lot of things get stuck in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So these folks, you just feel like how long does it take in a peer-to-peer setting when somebody is addicted to these types of drugs to really feel like they have been rehabilitated?
I'm 35 years in, and I don't think I'm rehabilitated. You know what I mean? It's like it's like whack-a-mole. You got process addictions. Money stuff comes up, gambling stuff comes up, sex stuff comes up, relationship stuff. The core, I think, is a codependency is kind of a weird overused word, but that relationship that you have with yourself is an important ingredient in this. And that the substances, if they're substances or processes with gambling or whatever, sex, they really just provide the pain relief, and in order to get to the real true other side, you really need to be aware of your your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, how you treat yourself, how you speak to yourself. And, that transcends into how you have relationships with other people. So it gets deeper, and only the people, you mentioned it, the people I call seekers, the people who are willing to continue to grow, who continue to want to have a life bigger than the life that they're leaving. Because some people are campers. I don't know if you ever heard this term, but if you're headed to the summit of a mountain, some people get pretty high and they like the view, and that's as far as they're going. But other people go past them to the summit because it's hard. There's work involved. You gotta put out effort, and you gotta visualize where you're going. And recovery is no different, than anybody's regular life or goal setting. And you just got to keep after it.
And we're talking years of recovery generally. This is just a constant. I mean, it's been interesting because my drug of choice that I really had to be, I smoked cigarettes for a good long while. I think I smoked for 5 years, and I'll never forget breaking that addiction. I mean, I really smoke cigarettes, like a pack a day, and people look at me and they're like, whoa, that's so weird. But, the college days when you didn't really know any better, right? And they were said to be okay. Boy, I hope I don't really pay for that later. But anyway, I've tried to pay penance for that. But anyway, but I remember when I quit smoking, I just remember the flood of emotions when I was trying to quit, but couldn't, like the powerful emotions of getting through that, and how emotionally addicted I was to cigarettes. And then the same thing, I remember the same thing with caffeine, just trudging through that and hearing all kinds of studies like, oh, caffeine is healthy for you. But for me personally, every time that I would drink caffeine, I would feel a higher level of anxiety. Just in general, I would feel more anxious, and I'm already A-type enough. I don't really need any more. But I would also notice that I would crash harder, later on in the day. And then I saw that I actually ate more. Like I would crave other things. I would crave sugar, especially at that 3 p.m. crash, even though I just drank caffeine in the morning. And those things really affected me. And of course, sugar was a huge drug of choice for me, but just pairing off each of those addictions one by one was really kind of an interesting growing experience. But I think just giving up smoking was just this huge reaction where I couldn't squash down my feelings anymore. And I made this analogy at the time, and I don't know if it's true, but the cigarettes created distance between me and other people. It actually created a safe space for me.
Mhm.
And in Chinese medicine, lungs are about grief. And so I really felt like I was suppressing my grief and keeping people away, whether that's voodoo or who, I don't know, but for whatever reason in my life, that resonated from what I experienced when I was younger. So I always found that to be like a really interesting, powerful experience, but really digging down into those deep, heavy emotions that you never really want to feel, honestly. You just want to feel up and alive and be happy and be the life of, whatever party. I don't really drink either. So, but it was just really interesting to see that.
No, it's a really excellent articulation of the process, right? Where you were able to, and I don't know if you did this in foresight, but definitely in hindsight, you're doing it now, where you kind of understood the process that you were, or came to understand the process that you were going through. And, cigarette smoking is, as the awareness was built, like I think in the 60s or 70s, 60s maybe, 40 or 53% of Americans smoke cigarettes, and now it's less than 14. And that happened from the awareness of the tobacco litigation, where every day for years people were talking about this, suing, and this is bad, this is bad. But this, your understanding of the emotional stuff is very real. And it's, what do I want to say? Touchy feely. People, like, they can't put it, like some people think that you can just turn it off, right? You can just turn it off. And it's just not true. There's a lot of mature forums now that are coming up on caffeine, where, and definitely cigarettes. I mean, cigarettes been around, what you're talking about, the mature people who really want to stay off the stuff talk exactly like you're talking, whereas the other folks said, I could put it down, never picked it up again, right? Well, they probably picked something else up. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of, I don't know, machoism, whatever you want to call it. And some people can do it, but most people can't, they do have to get the abstinence, but then they have to understand that they need a new way to process through emotions, right? They got to get a new system. And like we've talked about, people will substitute one for the other, train them back and forth, go back and go one, go sugar, go, back and forth, back and forth. So getting all the way through the other side. And I've often said I'm, too holistic for my own good, but call me, stupid or crazy or whatever, but I want to know what my body minus, I call it powder addiction, anything that's been reduced to a powder or smoke or whatever. It's like, I want to know what my body can do, my mind can do, my being can do without this stuff, because I think just intuitively, I know that it can do better, right? Because I would tell people, okay, so you're going to a concert, right? And you got a little pot, a little beer, a little whiskey, a little acid, a little cocaine. What's the goal going to this concert? The goal is to get to the concert at 9:30 when the main band comes on and be perfect, to have blended these things together so that you have managed or manipulated the state that you're in to feel the best for the concert, right? Well, just think about people doing this all day, every day with sugar, flour, caffeine, and nicotine, okay? So that they're unconsciously doing this. They're like, I can only have a cup and a half. I'm going to this meeting, or I have the jitters. I can, if I have too many donuts, I'll be down. I can't, so they're trying to make this balance happen. And they're literally playing with their biochemistry. They're playing with their dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA. They're playing with all these things. And this is like cultural. This is like ingrained. It's also unconscious. So they haven't even thought about doing it. They're just doing it, because these things are very inexpensive and ubiquitous and almost free, that they just think it's life. They just think, I need to grab a donut. I need to grab a coffee. I need to grab a cigarette. And they're not thinking about why. They're not thinking about why they're doing this, right? Until, like I said, they get some abstinence and get to the other side, then they start to understand it. No one with any abstinence from any of these processes or these drugs thinks back and doesn't understand what we're discussing right now. They get it. It's going from the standard American diet, the standard American culture, into this is where the problem. People cannot visualize it. They can't imagine not living with it, that they need, they quote unquote need it, Anyway, rambling on a little bit, you get it.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the hardest, two comments on that, but I think one of the hardest pieces that I've seen, because, I don't drink, I'm pretty particular about what I eat. I don't do any of the social habits, around drugs or whatnot. So I just like to go out and, I like to exercise, or I like to just rest at the end of the day, or whatever it is. But it makes it really hard to have a social life because you don't go get a beer with somebody. And I just personally, I've never really had a problem with alcohol. I just don't really like it. You don't want to go get a coffee with somebody. A lot of these things are taken out from a socialization aspect. And I think that a lot of people feel peer pressure to do that. And a common question I get asked is, well, you don't drink. What do you do when you go to a social get together and somebody, pressures you to drink? I mean, I don't care. I just say, I'm not interested. And if they press, I'm like, I'm still not interested. I mean, you're not going to change my opinion. I don't want to feel like that tomorrow. I feel terrible when I've had one glass of alcohol, or I just don't like the taste, or no, thank you, whatever it is. But a lot of people feel the pure pressure of that. Why do you think that is?
Again, we have 3 or 4 major tenets of our work, and this is, a lot of people say, the hardest one. It really is. It's the hardest thing to, what's that Zen saying? It's not, there's no great shakes to be perfectly adjusted to a sick society kind of thing. It's like, it's an evolutionary in culture. We've been enculturated for 300-400 years to have all these substances part of the norm, right? And it's going to take, like right now, cigarette smokers are vilified. They're just not, and people that drink and drive are vilified. But literally as short as 20-30 years ago, that was not the case. Society had not switched, and so we're in a tectonic shift of accepting the healthy, better way. And, the only way I've seen is to get new peers. If you were to go on an athletic team, if you're going to get a new job or go to a new school, a college, or whatever, you would end up with new friends, different friends. And in order to be successful, and I believe this with all my heart, in order to be successful in the changes around the things you and I are discussing, you need to have people who think like you and I do, or think like that you're where you're headed, that understand that the possibility exists that if you smoke or you do drugs or you use cigarettes or use sugar or whatever in excess. I mean, there's actually proven peer-reviewed science. Like, I always love the saying, you're going to become the average of the 5 people you hang around with most. Love that saying. And now the science has come out with a big study where you become the average weight of the 5 people you hang around with. They've done cluster tests. It's a big test. You can find it in the literature. And so you've got to get that new tribe. You've got to get that new crowd. And to be adapted to the old one, like you said, it doesn't bother me anymore, but I'm pretty introverted anyway, so it's not a big problem. And over years of not drinking and doing drugs, I've found that people don't really care what you're drinking drugs, but it's almost like the sugar's harder because they've made it for you, or there's a celebration and it's a symbol of the celebration. Like, you need to have the cake because everybody's having cake. That's the wedding or whatever. So yes, the social part is hard, and it's not to be taken lightly, nor is it to be ignored when you're trying to change. You have to account for it and study it and be part of it.
And what's so interesting to me is, with all of these things that stimulate dopamine and serotonin and epinephrine and norepinephrine, when I run these tests, they are always low, which is so incredible to me that we are just overstimulating and running these pathways continuously and just running ourselves out. And then, it creates these cravings for these things that we actually feel normal. Just like, why do I need to grab that donut or have that half a cup of coffee? If I have a full cup, I'm jittery, whatever it is. And you just see these things, create such havoc in our lives. And I think everybody wants to go back to just solely diet, but it's really looking at, I think you nailed it, who's around us, what our stress level is, all of those things to really look at a person's entire life and their entire health. So I think you're right.
You're in a
that.
catbird seat. You really are. And you may be, I don't know what the right word is. You're in a gifted, unique place that you get to see this feedback of their serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine. You get to see their levels, right? And I think the world changed on something called a continuous glucose monitor. That's number one. That's the first biofeedback, the first hack that, Google and Amazon are both working on, non-invasive, Fitbit, wear on your wrist kind of things that if you were wearing a Dexcom 6 right now, you could pick up your phone and you could look, and you ate that banana, you ate this, whatever you ate, it would go, instead of staying in the safe area, it would literally be bouncing in and out, right? And so then people could see what they were doing to the inside. And the tests that you describe are, they're rare. Very few people get those or take those. And look, we're dealing with our brains. We're dealing with the beautiful brain that makes us depressed, happy, excited, whatever. And we're playing with 2 million, 3 million years of evolution. And only literally it's like a blink in that 2 years, 10,000 years have we had the grains and the flowers and the caffeines and the drugs that we have now. And so the body that evolved over 2,999,900, you know what I mean? That body is not used to this stuff. I call it powder addiction. It's just not used to it, right? Yeah. Powder addiction is like, you probably got a little sand or dust or dirt in your food back in the day and the body could handle it. But when you're pounding 20 to 30 teaspoons a day of this powder, you're peeing all the time. That's a symptom of diabetes. You got to urinate all the time because your body's trying to get it out, right? And when you stop peeing. It's like not rocket science that, you stop sugar and flour, you can sleep through the night and don't have to go to the bathroom 3 or 4 times. That kind of stuff is so simple to explain to people, but I don't know. It's part enculturation. It's part addiction. There's a big soup, a big stew of why they're still doing it. But anybody gets the other side says, they say that to themselves. Why did I do that? How was I ever what was I thinking back then, That's wild, really.
Or I didn't know how much better I could feel,
right.
And why didn't I do this sooner? Why did I rely on all these quick fixes to feel better? But I just see it to be such an incredible, problem. But I'm with you. I make people, I can't wait until we get continuous monitoring, but I make people prick themselves 3, times a day, just to really see what the blood sugar levels are doing so that they can actually get that feedback. Because people will say, well, I don't have any symptoms of eating that. I haven't noticed anything. And I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and check this. And then that actually holds them accountable when they see the blood sugar spike that much, or when they see what 1 glass of alcohol does to them, or when they see what that chocolate chip cookie does, or those 5 chocolate chip cookies, even though they're not feeling any symptoms, but it's keeping them from getting to their goals. It actually makes it tangible. They have to see it on paper or on, the glucometer to really get a full appreciation of what's going on. But I think that that's a really, really powerful way to show them and to help them to understand and to be involved in the process without me constantly being like, what is it? What do you think? So I'm like, send me a Google Drive with your blood sugar every day. And they're like, she's going to be looking at it. Is she going to judge me? No. But I think it's just a really valuable tool, because we know that blood sugar dysregulation really is going to deplete our neurochemicals in such a big way, and then feed the pathogens in the gut. and create that vicious cycle. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got to get this feedback. I wasn't a biohacker before. I've come to know that this is something I want to know everything about. Now again, I'm kind of obsessed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm 100% agreement, man. We gotta, because look, you can eat, you can eat donuts for 50-40 years and probably be okay. But
Mm-hmm.
then you start the wheels come off the bus at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like the cocaine back in the day, that'll act really quick. The meth will act really quick. But caffeine, that's probably not going to kill you. And it's so subtle. But it's going to take years before the deep anxiety hurts, and then it's going to be like hard to get off.
Or you're going to end up with cardiovascular disease.
Right, you're habituated to it too. Yeah,
a large portion of America, right?
Yeah.
Number one killer. So
Sure.
Was there anything that I didn't cover that's important or that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, I think it was pretty comprehensive. I think that, folks you talk about the why and people need to see it. One of the things I find is that the folks that are successful are a little bit of a pioneer in their own life. They're not afraid to, either in athletics or school or job or family or something, they're the first to do something, or they're not afraid. They don't honestly give a shit what other people think. If they've done their research and they're willing to step out and try it. Mm-hmm. And those are what Silicon Valley calls the early adopters. I call it canaries in the coal mine. Those are the people that are going to change and save society, because look, the stuff hurts them and they know it hurts them, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to stop it from hurting them, and they start to feel it. And so, if this resonates with them, with folks that are listening, then they would, do what it takes to get the research get the research and change something. So that's the, pattern recognition kind of stuff. If you see enough people do this, you figure out who that person is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think most people are so disassociated out of their body, they don't even know what's affecting them. So I think that being back in your body is so critical.
Oh, yeah.
And where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you or be a part of one of your programs? What are all the details on that?
Yeah, the easiest way is the event you were on is the Quit Sugar Summit. Just wrapped. It was a virtual summit with all the educators in this field. But if you go there and leave your email, we have other stuff that we can, we'll tell you when the next one is. It's our 5th annual. We're going to have the 6th annual, but it'll be a while. But there's still other information that we have. But mostly I'm at sugaraddiction.com. And if there's a book there that's right on the homepage, you can just download. It's free. Kind of give my story again in a little bit, and then some, little plan to walk out of this. But yeah, that's the easiest way. Just go to sugaraddiction.com. We've got Facebook pages. We're the biggest Facebook page and that kind of stuff. So just we're out there. Just Mike Collins Sugar Addiction. You'll find me.
And that was a cool event. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. You were great on it too. We did the dopamine serotonin connection is so under talked about, no one knows about it, that I love bringing it up. And strangely, 3 or 4 other people brought it up this year when, past years, no one did. So.
Really? Yeah. There's more and more research out there. And I think we don't want to overstep and be like, well, we think X, Y, Z, but now the research is coming out and supporting, I think, what we've theorized for a really long time, but now we actually have the research to back it up and to be able to speak freely about it. So I really think that finally the research has caught up.
Well, that's what I always say. I call myself a 12-step anthropologist, right? Say there's a bunch of 12-step groups that work this out in a church basement by trial and error over 30 years. But now the science says it. The science is figuring out why that worked, why that process worked. Awesome. The science, And that's, people, I shouldn't say this, but I get in a lot of trouble, but, people rely a little bit too much on science when, like our elders or people that have traveled the path, they don't need to know why it works. They just know that it works.
Yeah. Now that's how we validate, right? That's how we
Yeah,
validate. Everybody wants to know the research or the studies. So
sure.
it's like,
It's cool. I mean, I'm okay. I'm getting better. One time I asked I said, Dr. Lewis, you got to calm the science down a little bit. And he admonished me and says, Mike, just let them know that I have the science,
That's what's important, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As long as you can back it up, everybody's fine. But if you're speaking willy-nilly, they get a little nervous.
And I also asked him, like, aren't you afraid of like the processed food? It's like $1 trillion industry. And he goes, no, man, I got the science now. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Totally.
A lot of sense.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for being here today.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for doing the summit and inviting me here. Appreciate it.
Totally.